She boarded like any other passenger, quiet, polite, seat 2A. But when a flight attendant accused her of faking her first-class ticket, they didn't know they just picked a fight with the highest-ranking black police chief in the state, and the whole cabin was watching. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Every morning for the past 20 years, Nia Dorsey's alarm went off at 4:30. And every morning, like clockwork, she would roll out of bed, stretch once, and reach for her neatly pressed police uniform hanging on the back of her closet door. But not today. Today was different. She sat on the edge of her bed a little longer than usual, her feet not quite touching the floor, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The silence in her small townhouse in Carlington, Illinois, felt heavier than it usually did. No radio buzzing updates, no police scanner chatter in the background, just her and the tick of the old wall clock in the hallway. "I get one day," she mumbled to herself, rubbing her palms together like she was trying to warm up courage. One day without the badge. Sliding the closet door open, she skipped past the uniforms and paused at a section she barely touched anymore. Civilian clothes, casual jackets, jeans she hadn't worn in months, a soft maroon sweater her daughter Amira gave her for Christmas last year. She ran her fingers across the fabrics like she was browsing someone else's life. It felt strange not having her badge clipped to her hip or her name stitched into fabric. She chose a pair of black slacks, comfortable walking shoes, and that maroon sweater. Then she packed lightly, a few work folders for the conference, a toiletry bag, and a tiny snow globe wrapped in tissue paper, a gift for Amira, who just started flight school in Texas. As she zipped up her carry-on, her phone buzzed with a notification. "Congratulations! Your seat has been upgraded to first class at no additional cost." Nia stared at the message for a few seconds before letting out a soft chuckle. "Well, look at that. Maybe the universe decided to give me something back for once." She didn't dwell on it long. She had a flight to catch. By the time she pulled out of her driveway and turned onto the sleepy suburban roads leading to Langston-Jameson International Airport, the sun was only beginning to stretch across the sky. Fog clung to the sidewalks. Coffee shops hadn't opened yet. The town still felt half asleep, like a child reluctant to start the day. On the radio, a story was breaking about a civil lawsuit against a major airline accused of profiling passengers of color. Nia turned the volume down, not because she didn't care, but because she already knew the ending. She'd seen versions of it too many times before. In her 2 decades of public service, she had sat with families after traffic stops gone wrong. She'd reviewed body cam footage no one should ever have to watch. She'd taken calls at 3 a.m. from officers she supervised, their voices shaking because someone had accused them of not belonging where they were. Still, even with all that experience today, she just wanted to be a traveler. Just another woman in an airport heading to Chicago for a leadership conference. She didn't want to be Chief Dorsey, not today. She arrived at the terminal early. The airport was already humming. Rolling suitcases clacked across polished floors, overhead announcements echoed with flight numbers and gate changes, and the smell of cinnamon from a nearby pretzel stand filled the air. Nia pulled her carry-on behind her and walked with steady purpose, head up but not high, blending into the rhythm of the crowd. At the check-in kiosk, she scanned her boarding pass and glanced at the screen as it confirmed her first-class upgrade. It still felt odd, like she was wearing someone else's shoes. At the security checkpoint, a TSA agent gave her a nod, then glanced down at her name on the boarding pass. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am," he said casually. Nia smiled. "Thanks. I'm trying something new, just being a passenger." He didn't quite get what she meant, but he smiled back anyway. For a few moments, everything felt easy, normal, unremarkable, and maybe that's all she wanted. As she made her way toward Gate 17, she noticed a young couple with 3 children standing near the directory map. They looked overwhelmed, speaking softly in Spanish, pointing at terminal signs with confusion. Nia stepped over without thinking twice. "¿Necesitan ayuda para encontrar su puerta?" she asked in perfect Spanish. The mother looked up, surprised but grateful. "Sí, por favor. No hablamos mucho inglés." Nia smiled, glanced at their boarding passes, and guided them to the right concourse, even walking a few gates down with them to make sure they were okay. The father shook her hand before leaving. "Thank you. Muchas gracias." She just nodded and gave the youngest child a wink. That was the kind of moment she missed the most, when help didn't come with a badge or a report number. Just a little human kindness. A few steps away, she didn't notice the pair of eyes watching her. Near the airline crew lounge, Haley Voss, the lead flight attendant for Flight 6742, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, one eyebrow slightly raised. Her Navy uniform was crisp, scarf knotted just so, and her smile thin as paper. When Naya walked past, Haley didn't move. She simply murmured under her breath, almost like a reflex, "Here we go again." No one heard it, not really, but the air shifted, just a little. And far behind her, the little girl from the Dominican family waved at Nia before disappearing into the crowd. Nia didn't wave back right away. She paused just for a second, wondering if this flight would be as quiet and smooth as she hoped. Then she kept walking, toward the gate, toward the seat marked 2A, toward a day that would change far more than just her travel plans. The gate area for Flight 6742 was already buzzing when Nia arrived. Travelers in suits leaned against charging stations, scrolling through their phones. Others, holding lattes and murmuring into AirPods, gave the usual impatient glances toward the boarding door like it owed them time back. Above them, a bright screen glowed with the words, "On time, boarding in 30 minutes." Nia settled into a seat near the priority boarding lane. She kept her carry-on close, resting her hand on the handle like it was second nature. She didn't need the badge today, but her instincts didn't switch off just because her uniform did. To most, she blended right in. Neutral clothes, calm posture, quiet confidence, but not to everyone. From behind the boarding counter, gate agent Kira Bloom glanced up from her screen and took note of Nia. She didn't frown, didn't say a word, but her gaze lingered a second longer than it did with anyone else, long enough to plant something unspoken in the air. Nia noticed it. She always did. She turned back to her phone, not reacting. A few rows over, an older couple whispered over their flight details. A young man in business attire tapped away on his laptop. For a moment, it felt like any other gate on any other day. Then came the sound of polished heels clicking against the tile. Haley Voss, in full uniform and perfectly composed, walked into the gate area with the measured pace of someone who expected attention and got it. Her expression was practiced, professional but cold. As she approached the counter, Kira leaned over and whispered something, barely moving her lips. Haley's eyes didn't follow Kira's. They were already locked on Nia. She tilted her head, then turned and walked toward the crew entrance, like nothing had happened. Nia, still silent, tucked her phone into her coat pocket. Something in the air felt off. She'd learned to trust that feeling. 15 minutes later, boarding began. The priority line filled quickly. First-class passengers lined up with practiced ease, holding leather briefcases and monogram bags. Nia joined the end of the short queue, boarding pass in hand. She stepped up to the counter when it was her turn. Kira took the pass without greeting, scanned it, and then hesitated, just enough to be noticed. She turned the pass over, held it to the light, even squinted at the QR code like it might reveal some hidden secret. "You're a first-class passenger?" she asked, louder than necessary. Nia nodded, voice calm. "Yes, seat 2A. Kira's brow creased slightly. "This seems unusual." Nia didn't flinch. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" Kira didn't answer right away. Instead, she waved over a supervisor, Darren Ewell, a tall man in a navy vest, already looking tired from whatever fire he'd put out before this one. "What's going on?" he asked. "Just need a verification on this one," Kira said, sliding Nia's boarding pass across the counter like it was a foreign object. Darren looked at the screen, then back at the pass. "It's valid. Purchased 3 weeks ago. Platinum status. No flags." Kira gave a stiff nod, but her expression didn't change. Nia stepped aside, watching as the next 5 passengers, white, well-dressed, confident, moved through without a pause. Their passes barely got a glance. No extra verification, no questions. She took a quiet breath and stepped onto the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, the scent of coffee and clean upholstery filled the air. Warm lighting softened the corners of the first-class cabin. Nia found her seat, 2A, right by the window. She settled in, set her carry-on beneath the seat in front of her, and let her shoulders drop just a little. She didn't notice at first that the man in 2B was watching her. He wore a gray blazer, crisp shirt, and polished shoes. Everything about him screamed comfortable wealth. He offered a nod, polite but reserved, then returned his attention to a thick folder of spreadsheets. The moments passed quietly. Then Haley appeared at the front of the cabin, checking the overhead bins and greeting the other passengers with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. When she reached row 2, her smile thinned even more. "Welcome aboard," she said to 2B, handing him a menu. Then she looked past Nia as if the seat were empty and moved on. Nia watched her go, not saying anything. But she felt it. She pressed the call button above her seat, more out of curiosity than need. Nothing happened. A minute later, she pressed it again. This time, Haley walked by, reached up, and turned the button off without a glance in Nia's direction. Then she smiled brightly at the passenger in 1D and offered him a hot towel. Nia sat back. She had been through worse, but still something about the silence in this cabin. It wasn't just quiet, it was pointed. She opened the notes app on her phone and typed 12:31 p.m., called for assistance. Ignored. Button manually turned off. No interaction. Across the aisle, the man in 2B shifted slightly. He glanced over at her, just for a second, then looked away. Nia returned to her phone. 12:35 p.m., observing inconsistency in treatment, documenting pattern. She tucked the phone into the seat pocket and stared out the window, where the tarmac shimmered in the late morning sun. Somewhere out there, the world still spun as usual, but in seat 2A, the air had started to feel heavier, and the flight hadn't even taken off yet. The hum of the cabin grew softer as the last of the first-class passengers settled into their seats. Conversations dropped to whispers, punctuated by the occasional clink of a glass or the rustle of a newspaper being folded just right. Nia remained still in 2A, her carry-on neatly tucked, her hands gently folded in her lap. But her thoughts weren't still. Not anymore. She knew the routine. She knew what was happening, the polite omissions, the way her presence was treated as an oddity, and the way Haley Voss walked past her seat like it didn't exist. There was no misunderstanding here, just a quiet choreography of exclusion, executed with a smile. Haley returned to the cabin, this time with a tray of pre-flight beverages. She offered water and sparkling wine to the couple in 1C and 1D, then to the suited man across from Nia in 2B. He accepted his with a nod. Haley turned, tray still balanced in one hand, and moved straight to 3A without acknowledging Nia at all. The tray never even tilted in her direction. Nia didn't speak. Not yet. She watched instead, observed the rhythm, the repetition. Across from her, 2B shifted again. He wasn't reading anymore. He was watching. She turned slightly toward him. "Do you think I'm invisible?" she asked, her voice low and calm. "Or just optional?" He blinked, caught off guard. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied, eyes still on Haley as the attendant served the next row. "Just notice." He looked away uncomfortable, but he'd heard her. That much was clear. Nia pressed the call button again, not expecting a different result, but unwilling to let the routine pass without challenge. A few seconds later, Haley reappeared. She didn't look at Nia as she reached up and turned off the button. No words, no eye contact. Then almost casually, she handed 2B a second napkin. "Let me know if you need anything else," Haley said with the kind of brightness reserved for preferred guests. 2B looked down at the napkin, then back at Nia. "You've pressed that thing 3 times, he said, a little louder now. Haley's smile tightened. "We'll get to her when we have time." "You got to me twice," he pointed out. Haley's expression didn't change. She offered a thin smile and moved down the aisle again. Silence fell between them for a moment. "I'm Donald, by the way," the man in 2B said. "Donald Reese." Nia nodded once. "Nia, I've flown with this airline for years," he said, as if confessing something. "I've never seen that before." "It happens more than you think," she replied. He hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. "Is this happening because you're—" Nia glanced at him, her eyes steady. "Because I'm black." "You can say it." Donald flushed. I didn't want to assume." She gave a soft shrug. They assume. Why shouldn't you? The tension in his posture eased just a bit, but the discomfort lingered. I don't usually get involved in things, he said. Nia turned to the window. Most people don't. She didn't say it unkindly, just a fact, an old one. Another tray came through, this time with hot towels. Haley skipped 2A's again. Nia didn't bother reaching for the button. Instead, she took out her phone and resumed typing. 12:44 p.m. Skipped during beverage service. Ignored after multiple calls. Fellow passenger acknowledged discrepancy. She glanced at Donald. He was still watching her, this time not with discomfort, but with a kind of quiet resolve. Then she noticed something else. 2 rows back, a woman, black, maybe late 60s, was watching too. Her face calm, her eyes sharp. She didn't say anything, but when Nia met her gaze, she nodded. Slow, measured, knowing. Support didn't always come loud. Sometimes it just came present. Haley passed by again, pausing to adjust something in the galley. Her eyes met Nia's for the first time that flight. No words, just a look. Dismissive. Cold. It said everything. Nia turned back to her seat, pulled her sweater around her shoulders, took a deep breath that didn't quite settle in her chest, and typed one more line into her phone. This seat was paid for, but I'm being reminded every few minutes that I still have to earn it. The plane hadn't even left the gate, but Nia already felt like she'd been in the air for hours, dragged through every subtle indignity first class could muster, and still she sat quiet. Still. Not because she was afraid, because she was calculating. Across the aisle, Donald Reese had put away his laptop. He was still glancing in her direction now and then, fidgeting with his watch like he wasn't quite sure what he was supposed to do. He'd noticed. That much was certain. Haley returned once more, this time offering dinner menus to everyone but Nia. Row 1, yes. 2B, of course. Row 3, naturally. When she reached 2A, her hand didn't even slow. She passed right by, like the seat was filled with air instead of a person. She didn't flinch, didn't double-check, just moved on. Donald cleared his throat, loudly. Excuse me, he said, his voice more solid now. You missed her. Haley stopped and turned, her face blank with that tight smile. I'll get to her in a moment, sir. Donald narrowed his eyes. She's been waiting longer than anyone else. Haley's smile thinned. There are procedures we follow. I appreciate your concern, but everything is under control. Nia didn't look up. She stared at the window, where a maintenance cart rolled by slowly. It made more noise than anyone in that cabin dared to make. From 2 rows back, the older black woman let out a quiet, deliberate sigh. Haley moved on. Nia leaned back in her seat and opened the Notes app again. 12:52 p.m. Skipped dinner menu. Passenger in 2B intervened. Response. Dismissive. Documentation continues. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a short delay due to a runway shift. Nothing unusual. What was unusual, at least to anyone watching closely, was Haley's increased tension. It showed in the way she held the serving tray, in the way she exhaled harder after each interaction with passengers not named Dorsey. Every few minutes, her eyes flicked to Nia. Not curious, not apologetic, defensive. When the hot towels came back around, Nia didn't even wait. She just watched as Haley, once again, skipped her without breaking stride. But the man in 2B had reached his limit. Ma'am, Donald called, this time louder than before, drawing attention from other passengers. She's sitting right here. She's been ignored since she boarded. This is becoming ridiculous. Haley turned around slowly, still holding the tray. I've already addressed this, sir. No, Donald said, sitting up straighter. You've avoided addressing it. That's not the same thing. Nia finally spoke, her voice calm and even. It's all right, Mr. Reese. No, he said, shaking his head. It's not. Haley looked from Donald to Nia, then to the other passengers who were now watching more openly. She forced a smile again and said, Of course. I'll get her towel. She walked away, tray still in hand. Donald turned to Nia. I'm sorry, I should have said something sooner. Nia looked at him, not angry, just tired. You did, she said. Now. At the front of the cabin, Haley whispered something to a younger flight attendant who hadn't spoken a word since boarding. The girl looked nervously toward Nia, then back at Haley. Whatever was said wasn't loud enough to hear, but the girl nodded, hesitant. From her seat, Nia noticed the exchange. She also noticed how Haley had stopped walking so smoothly. Her movements were sharper now, less practiced. Like the script she'd memorized was unraveling. The silence in the cabin had changed too. It wasn't passive anymore. It was alert. Passengers who had been tapping on tablets or thumbing through emails were now watching, not just curious, but aware. And when Haley returned, towel in hand, her fingers twitched just slightly before she handed it to Nia. "There you go, ma'am." Her voice sounded polished. Her tone did not. Nia accepted the towel without a word. But she looked Haley in the eye. Not confrontational, just steady. And Haley blinked. Just once. But it was the kind of blink that said, "I've been seen." She turned quickly and walked back toward the galley. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was pressure building. Donald exhaled like he'd been holding something in since boarding. "You handled that better than I would have?" Nia didn't respond right away. She unfolded the towel slowly, placing it across her lap. Then she said, more to herself than to him, "When you've been carrying this your whole life, it's not something you handle. It's just something you live with." And somewhere deep in that cabin, something shifted. Not in policy, not in process, but in perception. Because now no one could pretend they hadn't seen. The wheels of the plane hadn't even turned, but Nia could already feel something coming. It was in the air, the way stillness settles right before a storm. Not loud, not sudden, just thick. She'd seen it before, not in airports, but in police interviews, in community meetings that got too quiet, in the expressions of people trying to look neutral while their discomfort simmered just beneath the surface. From her window seat in 2A, she stared at the jet bridge, watching the light shift through its panels. It was hard to tell how much time had passed since she boarded. 10 minutes? 30? The plane felt like a vacuum, holding everything in place, waiting for something to break. Then Haley returned. This time, no tray, no towels, no menu. Just her. And her eyes locked straight onto Nia like she'd been rehearsing the moment since takeoff was delayed. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice clipped, "but your bag looks oversized for cabin storage." Nia turned her head slowly. Calm, careful. "It's the same one I've traveled with for the past 3 years," she replied. Haley took a half step closer. "We have policies, and this one may exceed—" "I measured it myself," Nia said, still level. "It's within regulations." "Then I'll need to see it," Haley replied, reaching down abruptly. Nia moved her hand, not to stop her, but to place it gently on top of the bag. A quiet boundary. "Please don't touch my personal belongings," she said. Not loud, not aggressive, just firm. Haley's fingers froze an inch from the handle. Her eyes didn't leave Nia's. Donald shifted in his seat across the aisle. Even the older woman in 4A had stopped reading her paperback, her eyes watching over the rim of her glasses. Haley straightened. "I'm responsible for ensuring cabin safety, ma'am. If there's a concern—" "There isn't," Nia said. "You've seen it. You've seen me. What exactly do you think I'm hiding in here?" Haley's nostrils flared, just slightly. Her hand twitched again, but she didn't reach. Not this time. She took a step back. "I'll alert the captain to conduct a secondary check." At that, a hush fell. Donald leaned forward. "What for? You've checked nothing else. You didn't ask a single person around her about their bags." Haley's mouth opened, then closed. She pivoted, turned on her heel, and marched toward the front of the cabin. Nia sat still, but inside her heart began to drum against her ribs. Not from fear, from something older, heavier, a deep, familiar knowing that this wasn't about a bag, and it never had been. 5 minutes passed. Then the cockpit door opened. But it wasn't the captain. It was a uniformed flight supervisor, young, pale, with anxious eyes behind square glasses. A badge pinned to his chest read, "Andrew Kessler." He approached with caution, glancing once at Haley, who stood behind him, arms folded. "Ma'am," he began gently, "I was told there's a concern about your carry-on size." Nia gestured toward the bag. You're welcome to measure it. He crouched down, pulled out a small measuring tape, and checked the dimensions. Quietly, carefully. After a moment, he stood. It's fine, he said, looking at Haley. Exactly within spec. Nia didn't smile. She didn't nod. She simply waited. Haley didn't speak. She turned and walked back toward the galley without another word. But Andrew lingered. Is there anything else I can assist you with? He asked. Nia shook her head. Number, thank you for being professional. He nodded once, then disappeared toward the front. The cabin exhaled as one. The tension had cracked just enough to let air back in. Donald leaned over again. That wasn't about the bag. Nia met his eyes. Number, it wasn't. He shook his head. They're picking the wrong fight. Nia looked out the window. The sun was climbing higher now, casting long beams of light across the tarmac. They're picking the right target, she said quietly. They just don't know what it'll cost them. She reached down, unzipped the outer pocket of her bag, and gently adjusted the snow globe inside. Still wrapped, still whole. Then she closed it again, hand resting on the zipper, like a lock that had just clicked shut. Boarding had long since ended, and still the door of the aircraft remained open. The flight attendants moved with that forced busyness people wear when they don't want to answer questions. Nia could see the tension in every gesture, how the smiles grew tighter, how the air got thicker. She wasn't the only one who noticed. Passengers shifted in their seats. Some leaned into their partners to whisper. Others stole glances toward the front of the cabin, where Haley stood again. This time with a tablet in hand, her eyes moving across the screen like she was hunting for an excuse. And then she found one. Haley approached slowly, stylus in one hand, the tablet cradled in the other. She stopped just shy of Nia's row, posture stiff. Ma'am, she began, loud enough for several rows to hear. There appears to be an irregularity with your boarding pass. Nia looked up, voice steady. What kind of irregularity? Haley tilted the screen toward her, though the brightness made it unreadable. The system flagged your reservation for manual verification. It's probably nothing, but we'll need to confirm your method of payment. Across the aisle, Donald frowned. Since when does a flight attendant verify credit cards? Haley didn't answer him. Her eyes stayed fixed on Nia. Nia didn't move. My ticket was purchased 3 weeks ago. I have the confirmation email if you need it. We'll need to verify it through our customer service team, Haley said. Please step off the plane. The cabin quieted. No one was speaking now. Even the usual rustling of safety pamphlets and magazine pages had stopped. Donald leaned closer. She's been sitting here for over 30 minutes. Now all of a sudden, you think the ticket's a problem? I'm not speaking to you, sir, Haley snapped, her voice sharper than before. She quickly turned back to Nia. We're asking you to step off. You're not asking, Nia said, her tone flat. You're trying to create a scene. Haley stiffened. We have the right to investigate suspected fraud. Fraud, Nia echoed. The word hung in the air like smoke. From somewhere in row 4, a voice murmured, Did she say fraud? Another passenger leaned into the aisle. This is getting out of hand. Nia slowly reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. She opened the email with the original confirmation. Then she held it out toward Haley. Here, confirmation number, flight details. Seat 2, A. Haley didn't even look at the screen. She stepped back. I'll get a supervisor, she said. And just like that, she vanished again. The silence that followed was suffocating. The woman in 4A, the one who'd been watching since boarding, spoke up loud enough for the front of the cabin. She's not doing this to anybody else. Donald nodded. It's harassment, plain and simple. Nia didn't say a word. She sat quietly, phone still in hand, her thumb hovering over the record button. But not yet, not until she had to. A few minutes later, a different airline employee stepped aboard. Mid-30s, South Asian, with a badge clipped to his collar, Ravi Solan, customer operations manager. He approached Nia with measured steps, eyes scanning the tension in the cabin. Ms. Dorsey, he said, his voice soft but clear. Your ticket's been confirmed. There's no issue. I apologize for the delay. Nia raised an eyebrow. Then why was I being asked to leave the aircraft? Ravi paused, then glanced over his shoulder toward Haley, who stood halfway behind the galley curtain. There was a Miscommunication, he said carefully. Nia said nothing, just watched him. I'll have someone bring you a beverage, he added. And again, our sincerest apologies. As he turned to leave, several passengers exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others quietly recording. Haley did not reappear. The door finally closed. The engines hummed louder. The plane began to taxi. Nia stared out the window again. She didn't blink, didn't sigh. She just sat there, the silence heavier than ever. Next to her, Donald exhaled hard. That was ugly, Nia finally spoke. That was predictable. And as the wheels lifted off the ground, so did something else. Something invisible, but powerful. The burden of staying quiet. It was slipping. The plane had reached cruising altitude, but no one seemed settled. The seatbelt sign was off. Drinks were being served. Conversations flickered across the cabin like small fires trying to stay lit. But under it all was something else. Something unspoken. A tension that hadn't lifted when the plane did. Nia hadn't touched her complimentary drink. The water bottle sat unopened on the tray table in front of her, beads of condensation slowly rolling down the sides. She stared at it, not really seeing it. Her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The interaction at the gate, the bag, the boarding pass, every step of this flight had chipped at something steady inside her. She was used to navigating these spaces with grace, with patience. But patience wasn't the same thing as peace. Across the aisle, Donald scrolled through his phone. Every so often, he'd glance up at her, then look away. He was still processing, still trying to square what he'd seen with what he thought he knew about the world. And that's when it happened. A soft vibration in Nia's lap, her phone. She picked it up and saw a notification. Airdrop request from passenger 4C. One video. She blinked. Passenger 4C. She looked back just in time to catch a quick nod from a young woman. Mid-30s, Latina, glasses, holding her phone casually like nothing had happened. The nod wasn't dramatic, just confirmation, quiet solidarity. Nia accepted the file. It loaded quickly. A 30-second clip, grainy but clear. The moment Haley told her to step off the plane, the word fraud echoed through the audio, unmistakable. And the camera lingered long enough to show Haley turning her back as Nia calmly presented her proof. No narration, no edits, just the raw moment. Nia stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the share icon. She didn't tap it, not yet. Instead, she saved the file and opened her Notes app again. 1:42 p.m., video received. Passenger documented interaction. Fraud accusation captured. Evidence secured. She leaned back, letting her head rest against the seat. The sound of the cabin came back into focus. The clinking of ice, the murmur of conversation, the low hum of jet engines. Then Donald spoke. "Do you think they even realize how wrong this is?" he asked. Nia turned her head toward him. "No," she said, "because it's not wrong to them. It's routine." He nodded slowly. "And to you?" "It used to feel personal," she said. "Now it just feels structured." Donald sat with that for a moment. "You gonna do something with that video?" Nia didn't answer right away. She glanced out the window at the clouds rolling past, soft and unbothered. "I don't know yet," she said finally, "but I know I'm not deleting it." A few rows back, a flight attendant brought a drink to a white man in 3B, his third. No comment, no question. The same attendant passed Nia without a word. She didn't flinch, just picked up her phone again. Pattern confirmed. Differential treatment ongoing, maintaining log. Donald adjusted in his seat, turning toward her. "You ever think about going public?" She raised an eyebrow. "With what?" "With this, all of it. You've got the record, the experience, and now you've got evidence." Nia paused. Then she smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile you offer to make someone comfortable. It was the kind you give when you've already made up your mind about something that no one else knows yet. "I don't need to go public," she said. "I just need to be ready for when the moment comes." Donald sat back, clearly unsure how to respond. Nia turned back to the window. The world beyond was bright, quiet, calm. But inside her, something had shifted. Not rage, not revenge. Something deeper. Readiness. The sun had begun to fade beyond the windows, casting the cabin in a golden hue that made everything look softer than it was. Passengers stirred in their seats, stretching, rubbing their eyes, or scrolling half-heartedly through in-flight entertainment they barely watched. The hum of the engine remained steady, constant, almost comforting. But Nia Dorsey felt anything but comfort. She had spent most of the flight in silence, cataloging every slight, every omission, every choice Haley had made to remind her she wasn't welcome. She'd watched drinks offered across her row without a glance in her direction. She'd watched others receive extra snacks, warm smiles, even conversations about dinner plans. She got air. At first, she'd tried to reason it through. Maybe they were busy, maybe it was an oversight. But reason had limits, and it had long since been passed. The file in her phone was no longer just a clip. Over the last hour, she'd received 3 more recordings, one from 4A, another from a man in 3D, even a short video from the aisle seat in 2C, catching Haley walking by her with a smirk after delivering drinks elsewhere. People were watching now, and people were sharing. She hadn't asked for it. They just gave it, quietly, anonymously. But not everyone was quiet. Halfway through the flight, the young flight attendant, Haley's assistant, approached. She looked barely 22, her posture unsure, voice barely above a whisper. "Ms. Dorsey," she said, "would you like a glass of water?" Nia glanced up. The girl's hands trembled slightly as she held out the cup. Behind her, Haley watched from the galley curtain, arms folded, mouth pressed thin. Nia took the cup. "Thank you," she said softly. The girl nodded quickly, almost in apology, and disappeared down the aisle. Donald leaned over again. "She doesn't look like she wants to be part of this." "She is," Nia said, "whether she wants to or not." Donald sat back, guilt tugging at his expression. He hadn't done anything wrong, but he hadn't done much right either. Not at first. The silence stretched again until he finally spoke. "You planning to report all this?" "I've reported it," she said, lifting her phone slightly. "Just not through their channels." He nodded, thoughtful. "I guess you're waiting for the right time." Nia turned toward him, her face calm, her eyes not. "Number, I'm deciding if I want to burn the whole thing down or build something better from it." Donald looked away, unsure what to say to that. A few minutes later, Haley returned, not with water, not with service, with a clipboard. "We're conducting a cabin satisfaction survey for first-class passengers," she announced, passing papers down the rows. She skipped Nia's seat. Again. Nia leaned back. "You skipped me." Haley's smile was almost too perfect. "The survey is optional, ma'am." "But you didn't ask," Nia replied. "You assumed I wouldn't want one." "Some passengers prefer not to be bothered." "Like the 3 people you just handed one to?" Donald's head turned. The woman in 4A adjusted in her seat. Haley's jaw tensed. "I'm following standard procedures," she said. Nia met her gaze without blinking. "Then your standard needs review." Haley turned on her heel and left the row, clipboard held tight like a shield. Donald exhaled. "Wow." Nia didn't respond. Her heart was pounding, but her face stayed calm, still, solid. The truth was, she didn't want this moment. She didn't crave confrontation. She wasn't built for spectacle, but the line had been crossed, and now it wasn't about comfort. It was about dignity. She opened her phone, tapped record. Then she pressed her thumb over the screen for a second longer than usual and hit Save to Cloud. Backups, always. From the corner of her eye, she saw a new notification. Passenger 4A has started recording. She glanced back. The older woman looked right at her, nodded once, and kept filming. Nia whispered to herself, barely audible. "I didn't want this fight, but I won't walk away from it." Somewhere deep in her chest, something settled. Not peace, not yet, but readiness. The kind you don't talk about, the kind that shows up when the truth's too loud to ignore. The cabin was dimmer now, lights softened for evening service. Most passengers had reclined their seats, some with eyes closed, others watching movies with earbuds in. A few remained alert, quiet, watching, waiting. The energy had changed. Even with the hush of cruising altitude, Tension simmered just beneath the surface. Nia sat upright. She hadn't reclined her seat, hadn't watched a movie. Her tray table was still down, a legal pad in front of her, nearly full of notes, precise handwriting, bullet points, times, names, evidence. Donald had mostly stopped speaking. There was a kind of reverence in his silence now, like he realized this wasn't his story, but he had somehow been written into it. And then the curtain parted. Haley reappeared. But this time she wasn't holding trays or menus or clipboards. She was alone. And she was headed straight for Nia. The hush grew heavier. Row 3 went quiet. Row 4 sat up straighter. Haley stopped at 2A, planted herself squarely beside Nia's seat, and spoke loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. "There must be some mistake," she said, her tone stiff. "This seat can't possibly be assigned to you." Nia blinked. Once, then slowly turned her head. "I'm sorry," she asked calmly. Haley motioned toward the seat, her hand trembling ever so slightly. "This is first class. Seat 2A is reserved for premium members, frequent flyers, corporate accounts, not leisure passengers." Donald sat up straight. "What the hell does that mean?" Nia held up a hand gently, signaling him to wait. "What exactly do you mean by not leisure passengers?" she asked Haley. Haley didn't back down. "You know exactly what I mean." Now it was the rest of the cabin that began shifting, reacting. People looking up, watching. The older black woman in 4A had her phone lifted again. No shame this time. Haley's voice grew harder. "You're out of place here," she said. "People like you don't belong in first class on my aircraft." There it was. The quiet broke like glass. Gasps, murmurs. Someone in row 1 actually cursed under their breath. Nia sat still, but her eyes locked on Haley like steel. "What kind of people are you referring to?" Haley blinked, suddenly realizing she'd gone too far, but pride wouldn't let her backtrack. "I think you know." And just like that, the moment was frozen, hanging in the air like a bad taste. Nia slowly reached for her phone, unlocked it, and tapped the voice memo. Recording. She didn't say a word. Haley stared at the phone. "You can't record during flight operations," she said quickly, voice shaking now. But it was too late. Other phones were already raised. Row 1B, row 2D, row 4A. Passengers holding them steady, silent, bearing witness. The room had turned on her. Haley's mask slipped. "I'm calling security," she snapped. "You're creating a hostile environment." Nia raised an eyebrow. "I haven't left my seat," she replied calmly. "You're the one hovering over me." "This is insubordination," Haley spat. "You're being aggressive." Donald stood up. "She hasn't done a damn thing." "Sir, please return to your seat," Haley shouted, her voice cracking. Nia kept her tone even. "The only aggression here is yours." That was the final thread. Haley turned toward the galley, grabbed the intercom and pressed the button. "Security to first class," she said, her voice ringing out over the cabin speakers. "Disruptive passenger at 2A. Please respond immediately." The cabin froze. Someone whispered, "You've got to be kidding me." Nia didn't move, didn't panic, didn't flinch. She simply reached into the inner pocket of her blazer, slow, deliberate, and pulled out a small badge wallet. She held it up without drama. No grand gesture, just enough for Haley and the passengers behind her to see what it said. Chief Nia Dorsey, Metropolitan Police Department. Silence. Not one breath in that cabin moved, and then the shift happened. Haley's face turned pale. Not just surprised, but gutted. Her jaw slackened. Her arms dropped. She stepped back from Nia like she'd touched something electric. "Wait," Haley stammered. I didn't know." Nia lowered the badge slowly. "You didn't need to know," she said. "You just needed to do your job. Fairly." Haley turned toward the cockpit. Her composure was gone. Passengers stared, phones still recording, truth now undeniable. And outside the windows, the sky remained perfectly calm. But inside that cabin, the storm had already begun. For a moment, nothing moved. The engines still hummed. The drinks still sat half-finished on tray tables. And the clouds outside drifted by like They didn't know a thing about what just happened inside 6742. But inside, something had cracked open. Haley Voss stood frozen, her mouth slightly parted, eyes locked on the gold badge in Nia's hand, like it was a weapon. Maybe to her, it was. Not because it posed a threat, but because it held power. Real power. Not assigned by a uniform, but earned. Across the aisle, Donald didn't sit back down. He looked stunned, like the woman beside him had just stepped out of the pages of a book he never knew existed. "You're a police chief?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Nia didn't answer. She didn't need to. Passengers were now rising from their silence. Literally, a woman from row 1B stood up. Her name tag still hung around her neck. Conference badge. Same event as Nia's. "I saw everything," she said, phone still recording, "and I hope you know it's all been documented." In 3C, a young man raised his hand like he was in a town hall meeting. "Same. I've got the video from when she was told to step off the plane." Then 4A, the quiet elder with the paperback and piercing gaze, spoke without rising. "You can't unring a bell," she said to no one in particular, "and this one's ringing all the way to the courthouse." Haley backed up a step. Her perfect posture faltered. Her hands, always smooth in movement, now clutched at the hem of her blazer, like she didn't know where to put them. "I didn't mean," she began, but her voice cracked under the weight of the moment. "You meant every bit of it," Nia replied, still calm, still seated. "You just didn't expect consequences." The younger flight attendant from earlier peeked from the galley, her eyes wide, face pale. She wasn't part of it, but she wasn't separate from it either. The intercom crackled. The captain's voice came on, her tone carefully neutral. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're aware of a situation in the cabin. Please remain calm and seated. We'll be landing shortly." But calm was no longer the flavor of the hour. Passengers were whispering, pointing, documenting, and then came a shift no one expected. Nia stood. She didn't do it quickly. There was no drama in the movement. But once she was on her feet, the atmosphere turned again. Not tense, not angry, respectful, and focused. Haley stepped back instinctively, as though Nia might do something she hadn't already done. Stand her ground. "You accused me of fraud," Nia said softly. "You ignored every professional courtesy. You denied me service. You tried to humiliate me. And not once did you stop to ask why I was calm through all of it." Haley said nothing. Nia turned toward the rest of the cabin. "I've spent my entire career training officers on how not to escalate, on how to de-escalate bias in real time. And here today, you gave us all a case study." Someone in the back clapped. Just once, then another, and then a small ripple of applause. Quiet, uneasy, but real. Haley flushed deep red. "This isn't over," she muttered under her breath. Nia leaned in just slightly. "No," she said. "It's just beginning." Behind her, Donald sat down slowly, still processing. Haley turned and practically fled toward the galley. The curtain flapped closed behind her like it was trying to seal her out from the rest of the flight. The seatbelt light came on. The captain's voice returned. "Flight attendants, prepare for landing." Nia didn't sit. She remained standing as long as she was allowed, facing the front, calm and poised. And the passengers? They didn't see just a woman in seat 2A anymore. They saw a storm in stillness, a reckoning in plain sight. And as the plane descended into the lights of Chicago, the only thing heavier than the landing gear was the silence surrounding the woman who just turned a flight into a movement. The plane began its gradual descent into Chicago. But inside Nia's mind, everything was rising. Pressure, emotion, resolve. She could feel the altitude shift in her chest, that familiar squeeze of cabin pressure mixed with something far more human. The weight of decision. She stood just long enough to make a point. Long enough for every passenger to see her not as a victim, but as someone in command of herself in the moment. Then, as the flight attendant's voice politely asked everyone to return to their seats, she sat back down. Slow, measured, unapologetic. The curtain to the galley remained shut. Haley hadn't returned. The young flight attendant, nervously stepping in for her superior, passed through the cabin with shaky hands checking seatbelts. When she reached Nia's row, she paused for a second too long. "I just want to say," she whispered, not looking directly at her. "I'm sorry for everything." Nia didn't offer a smile or a nod. She simply replied, "It's not me you should be saying that to." The girl moved on. The wheels dropped from the plane with a soft mechanical thud, followed by a slight rumble beneath their feet. Nia glanced out the window. Chicago's skyline spread in the distance, dark silhouettes against the golden spill of evening. Beside her, Donald cleared his throat. "I imagine you've had worse days," he said, forcing a half-smile. "I have," Nia said quietly, "but few with this much documentation." He chuckled, but it didn't last. "I meant it earlier," he added. "You've got the voice, the badge, the background. If anyone can do something with this, really change something, it's you." Nia looked down at her phone. The folder she'd created now had 6 videos, 4 audio recordings, a dozen notes, timestamps, and passenger names who had volunteered to speak. And one more thing, a message from her assistant back at the precinct. "Media requests just came in from Channel 7. They heard you were on Flight 6742. I haven't responded." Nia stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply. She had a choice. Let this stay as a flight story told over coffee tables and living room conversations, or let it be the match that lit up an entire system. She remembered something her mother used to say: "When you sit quietly through disrespect, you teach them it's acceptable." She tapped out a quick message. "Forward all media inquiries to me directly. Do not filter, schedule interviews after landing." Then she hit send. Donald raised an eyebrow. "So that's a yes?" Nia didn't smile, but her voice held something that hadn't been there before. A new weight, a sense of direction. "No more quiet flights," she said. "Not when the whole cabin's awake." The wheels touched down with a bump. The plane slowed, engines whirring to a stop as the lights inside flickered brighter. In the galley, the curtain pulled back slightly. Haley peeked out, just for a moment, then disappeared again. And somewhere behind Nia, a passenger muttered, "Bet she regrets boarding this one." The seatbelt sign pinged off. Phones came out again, not just to text loved ones, they were ready to share, to speak. As passengers began standing, stretching, and retrieving bags, Nia remained seated. The power wasn't in rushing off the plane, it was in what came after. She glanced toward the aisle. The crew would be waiting at the gate. So would the press. And soon, so would accountability. She finally stood, slow and steady, like she had all the time in the world. Because for the first time on that flight, she did. The overhead bins creaked open as passengers stood one by one, retrieving their belongings. Stretching legs stiffened from hours in the air. But no one moved quickly. It wasn't the usual scramble to get off the plane. Everyone felt it, the moment hanging in the air like thunder before a storm. Nia Dorsey stood last. She didn't need to rush. She knew eyes were on her, some curious, some supportive, others unsure. But all of them watching. Haley hadn't reappeared, not since that last exchange. The younger flight attendant stood at the front of the cabin now, nervously thanking passengers as they deplaned. Her voice cracked slightly with each repetition. "Thank you for flying with us. Have a good evening." When Nia finally stepped into the aisle, Donald waited. "I'll walk with you," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right." They stepped into the jet bridge together. The air was cooler there, stale but still a relief after the thick cabin tension. Midway down, voices grew louder. Footsteps echoed. Nia could see shadows moving beyond the glass. And then she saw them. 2 airport police officers standing at the end of the jet bridge. Calm, alert. Not in response to her, but clearly briefed. Their posture said so. Next to them stood Ravi Solan, the airline's customer operations manager, and a tall white man in a navy blazer, hair too neat, smile too thin. His badge read Garrett Rhymes, Regional Director, Atlantic Air. Behind them, more movement, cameras, at least 2 local news crews. Nia's expression didn't change. She kept walking. Ravi stepped forward first. "Chief Dorsey," he began, nervous. "We'd like to—" She held up her hand. "Before you say anything, I need to ask, is Haley Voss still on board this aircraft?" Garrett stepped in quickly. "Let's discuss this in a more private setting." "No," Nia said flatly. "Right here, where it happened." Passengers were still filing into the terminal now, gathering behind her in small clusters. Donald remained beside her. The woman from 4A stood near the windows, her arms folded like she was already writing the op-ed in her head. Ms. Voss has been placed on immediate administrative leave, Garrett said quickly, pending investigation. You mean pending damage control? Nia replied. He flinched at the bluntness, but she wasn't done. I'll be submitting a formal complaint, but I'm not interested in another internal memo or a temporary suspension with pay. This was targeted harassment, documented by multiple witnesses. She paused, then glanced toward the news cameras now filming through the terminal glass. And I'd say your flight became a public hearing the moment she called me a fraud and tried to have me removed for sitting in the seat I paid for. Ravi stepped forward again. We deeply regret. Save the apology for the press release, Nia cut in. You're not sorry about what happened. You're sorry people saw it. Donald looked between them, eyes wide. Then the older woman from 4A stepped closer. She'd changed her shoes but kept the same calm fire in her gaze. If this woman files a lawsuit, she said loud enough for the crowd to hear, put my name on the witness list. I saw everything. Another voice chimed in. Someone from row 3. Me too. Then another. And I've got footage. Garrett looked like someone watching a dam crack wide open. One of the news reporters pressed forward now, microphone raised. Chief Dorsey, do you believe what happened to you today reflects a systemic issue in the airline industry? Nia turned to the camera, her posture still, voice clear. I believe what happened today reflects what happens when power goes unchecked. What happens when discrimination hides behind procedure, and what can happen when people stop looking away. A hush fell, then a flash went off, then another. The cabin might have landed in Chicago, but the story was about to take off far beyond the airport. Garrett muttered something into his phone. Ravi looked like he wanted to disappear. But Nia? She adjusted the strap on her carry-on, turned toward the terminal, and walked straight into the next phase of the fight. By the time the news segments aired that evening, Haley Voss's name was already trending, not in ways she could control. The headlines were everywhere. Police chief accused of fraud on Flight 6742. Racial profiling at 30,000 feet, airline faces backlash. Caught on camera, first-class confrontation sparks industry review. And there she was, in frame, in full color, leaning over seat 2A, telling a calm black woman she didn't belong. It didn't matter that Haley had slipped quietly out a side exit after the plane landed. The story had already gone where she couldn't. Every angle, every second, captured and shared by passengers who refused to let the moment vanish in the white noise of travel. Atlantic Air tried to spin. They issued a vague statement about investigating procedural concerns and reaffirming commitment to inclusive service. But by morning, that wasn't enough. The CEO was pulled into a press conference. Haley was officially suspended without pay, and internal memos leaked, revealing prior complaints, ignored reports, even emails where she'd referred to certain passengers as not quite first-class material. For the first time in her decade-long career, Haley Voss found herself outside the protective shield of her uniform and inside a spotlight she couldn't dim. Meanwhile, Nia Dorsey wasn't giving interviews. Not right away. She let the facts do the speaking, the recordings, the notes, the timestamps, the corroborating witnesses who had already begun submitting their own accounts through official channels. She moved like a tactician, not in anger, but in precision. Still, the offers flooded in. Daytime talk shows, civil rights panels, network exclusives. She declined them all, for now. Instead, she met with her team behind closed doors at her precinct. You have every legal right to sue the airline, her assistant said, sliding a thick folder across the desk. The evidence is overwhelming. Nia looked at the folder. Then she looked out the window. They'll settle, she said. They'll write a check and change nothing. So what do you want to do? Nia didn't speak for a long moment. Then she turned back, eyes steady. I want them to admit it. On record. I want the policy changes made public. I want the people who protect the Haleys of the world to sit across from me and explain, face to face, how this keeps happening. Her voice stayed quiet, but it didn't lack weight. I want more than compensation. I want confrontation. Her team exchanged glances. No one argued. The next day, Nia released a statement. Just one page. It didn't name Haley. It didn't demand money. It simply described what happened, point by point, with no adjectives, no speculation, just facts. Then at the bottom, a single line. This isn't about me. It's about who gets believed and who doesn't when they sit in seat 2A. That quote led the evening news. By Friday, 3 more passengers had come forward. Black, Hispanic, Asian. All had been randomly reseated, flagged for further verification, or mistaken for staff by Haley Voss on past flights. Her pattern, once dismissed, was now undeniable. The airline scrambled. A board meeting was held. Haley was officially terminated. But even that wasn't the end, because Nia wasn't done. She'd been invited to speak at a roundtable on racial bias in air travel, hosted by the Transportation Equity Council. She hadn't said yes, until now. She picked up the phone. "I'll come," she told the organizer. "But not to speak, to build." They paused. "Build what?" Nia leaned back in her chair. "A system where my daughter doesn't have to carry a badge just to be believed." And for the first time that week, she smiled. A week later, Nia walked into the Atlantic Air Executive Tower, not through a service entrance, not with a badge on her belt, but as a civilian with a folder in hand and a team of civil rights attorneys beside her. The receptionist looked up from her desk, eyes flicking briefly to the woman in dark slacks and a neutral blouse. She didn't look angry. She didn't look rattled. She looked prepared. "We have a 10:30 with the board," Nia said. "Of course," the receptionist stammered, quickly tapping keys. "They're waiting upstairs." They always are, Nia thought. The elevator ride was silent. Her attorneys flanked her on either side, but she didn't need them to say a word. She had said everything that mattered on Flight 6742, without raising her voice, without stepping out of line, without giving them what they'd hoped for, a scene. Now she was about to give them something else, consequences. The boardroom on the 32nd floor was glossy and over-air conditioned, the kind of room where apologies come dressed in suits and facts get softened by PR language. But today there would be no softening. Across the polished table sat the airline's senior executives, Garrett Rhymes, the regional director, included. Beside him were 2 corporate attorneys and someone from their crisis management team. They stood when Nia entered. She didn't shake hands. Garrett cleared his throat as everyone settled. "Chief Dorsey, we appreciate you agreeing to meet." "I'm not here for appreciation," she replied. There was a pause. A few pens clicked open. Garrett folded his hands. "We deeply regret what happened on your flight. The employee involved has been terminated, and we've reviewed." Nia opened the folder in front of her and laid out several sheets of paper. Flight records, testimonies, prior passenger complaints, all pointing to a pattern long ignored. "No," she interrupted. "You've reacted. That's not the same as accountability." She leaned forward. "You allowed Haley Voss to fly for 8 years. During that time, multiple passengers, Black, Latino, Asian, filed complaints about extra screening, uncomfortable questioning, and denied service. You mark those cases as isolated." She tapped one document. "Now we both know they weren't." Garrett looked uncomfortable. "We're prepared to make a financial settlement." "I'm not here for money." His head lifted, startled. "I'm here for policy." The room went quiet. "My conditions are simple," Nia continued. "First, full transparency. Publish the number of discrimination complaints received in the last 5 years. Break it down by flight route, staff member, and outcome." The PR director shifted in her seat. "That's highly irregular." "No," Nia said. "What's irregular is a police chief being accused of fraud in front of a cabin full of witnesses because she sat in first class." She moved to the next page. "Second, mandatory bias and de-escalation training for all frontline employees. Not just diversity videos and onboarding, real instructor-led training, reviewed annually." A long pause. "Third," she said, voice steady, "your flight attendants and gate agents will no longer be the final word on ticket validity without supervisor verification. No more gut feelings determining who gets pulled aside." Garrett frowned. "That's a significant operational change." "Not as significant as what happens when your next Haley drags a senator off a plane," Nia said flatly. The room stiffened. Her eyes swept across the table. I'm not here as someone looking for headlines. I'm here because I've spent my life cleaning up the damage caused by unchecked authority. She leaned back. This is your opportunity to prove you understand that authority should serve, not discriminate. Garrett looked to his counsel. Then he looked back at Nia. We'll need time to review these proposals. Nia nodded. You have 72 hours. After that, I hold a press conference with the full witness list and every piece of footage collected. And I won't be asking for change. I'll be demanding resignations. No one spoke. Not for a long while. Then Garrett finally said, We'll be in touch. Nia stood. Let's hope it's the right kind of touch. She gathered her folder, nodded to her team, and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind a silence that felt more like a reckoning than a pause. 3 days later, the countdown ended. At exactly 10 a.m., Atlantic Air held a live-stream press conference, standing before a wall of microphones in their headquarters glass atrium. The backdrop wasn't flashy, just a plain navy blue banner with the company logo in white. Garrett Rhymes took the podium, papers in hand, his tie knotted too tight, his eyes scanning the room filled with journalists, passengers from Flight 6742, and more than a few off-duty employees watching closely from the back. He cleared his throat. Today, Atlantic Air acknowledges a failure. Murmurs. Camera shutters clicked. A failure not only in individual judgment, but in systemic oversight. We did not act when prior complaints should have raised red flags. We allowed certain employees to enforce policy based on personal bias. And as a result, Chief Nia Dorsey, an accomplished public servant and a paying customer, was treated with disrespect and suspicion on our aircraft. He paused, swallowing hard. We accept full responsibility for what occurred on Flight 6742. A statement no one expected them to make. Not like this. Not this direct. Behind the podium, a table held printed copies of new internal memos, the bias training program redesign, the transparency reports Nia demanded, and the newly passed employee protocol titled, First, Confirm, then Act. Then something more surprising happened. Garrett stepped aside, and Nia walked up. She wasn't in uniform, no badge, no legal pad, just her, standing tall in the very space where so many corporate apologies had died quiet deaths. She didn't touch the microphone. She didn't thank the board. She just spoke. When I was 16, she said, my mother told me that the world doesn't always give you a choice in how you're seen, but it does give you a choice in how you stand. She looked around the room. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried. I didn't set out to lead a movement from seat 2A. I was just trying to get to Chicago. But the moment I was labeled a problem, the moment I was asked to prove I belonged, I knew silence would cost more than speaking ever could. A beat. Today isn't justice. It's just the beginning of accountability. Justice is when no one needs a badge or a title to be treated like they paid the same ticket as everyone else. A wave of applause began, scattered at first, then building. But Nia didn't smile. She stepped away, leaving the microphone humming. Out in the crowd, Haley Voss stood in civilian clothes, barely recognized. No more uniform. No more wings pinned to her chest. Just another face among many. Her eyes were glassy, her jaw clenched tight. She didn't look angry. She looked wrecked. Back when she sat on that jump seat, she thought power came from proximity, from knowing who belonged where and making sure they stayed there. But now, surrounded by accountability, she understood. She had built her career on control and watched it dissolve in the presence of composure. Outside the building, reporters swarmed. Protesters held signs. Dignity can't be upgraded. Seat 2A is every seat. Flying while black is not a crime. The movement had a name now. The media called it the 2A moment. Within days, other stories surfaced. Passengers emboldened to speak up. Airlines nationwide announced internal reviews. Flight staff, who'd once looked the other way, began calling out peers who crossed the line. Change didn't come from the boardroom. It came from a woman who refused to lower her voice when the room got uncomfortable. And across the country, quiet flyers sat up a little taller in their seats, knowing they weren't alone anymore. 6 months later, the sun rose over the tarmac of a small regional airport just outside Atlanta. Inside a bright new classroom near Gate 7, 20 young flight attendants sat upright in their fresh-pressed uniforms, notebooks open, eyes fixed forward. On the wall behind them was a photo, framed and centered above the podium. A still shot pulled from a phone video. A calm black woman seated in first class, eyes steady, as a flight attendant pointed down at her. Underneath, a simple caption. Accountability begins at altitude. Nia Dorsey stood in front of them. Not in uniform, not in power, but in presence. She wasn't here to lecture. She was here to remind. Every seat has a story, she said. You don't know where a passenger's been, what they've overcome, or who they are beyond the boarding pass. The classroom was silent. They weren't distracted. They weren't restless. They were listening. When you decide who deserves dignity, she continued, you're not just making a customer service choice, you're making a societal one. A few heads nodded. A few wrote faster. This was her 6th training session this month. After Atlantic Air implemented their reforms, other airlines followed. They invited her not just because of what happened, but because of how she handled it. Her presence had become more than a symbol. It had become structure. After the session, a young black woman approached her near the coffee table. I wasn't going to apply for first-class crew, she said quietly. I thought it wasn't for people like me. Nia smiled, soft and full of knowing. Now you know better, the woman smiled back. Later that afternoon, Nia sat on a bench outside the terminal, watching planes rise into the sky, one after another. Her phone buzzed. A text from Donald Reese. Did you see the Times piece? They called you the Rosa Parks of 30,000 feet. She chuckled, typing back. I'm no Rosa. I just didn't want my coffee skipped. Then she paused, deleted the message, typed again. I'm just someone who knew silence wasn't going to save me. Across the runway, a 737 began taxiing, its wingtip catching the sun just right. Seat 2A, she thought. Funny how one seat can change the course of an entire industry. But that's the thing about truth. Once seen, it can't be unseen. Once heard, it echoes. And once stood for, it gives others permission to stand too. As the engines roared and the plane lifted, Nia leaned back on the bench. She wasn't flying today, but she was still moving forward. And this time the whole sky was watching. Sometimes it's not about raising your voice. It's about refusing to shrink. Nia didn't shout. She didn't demand. She just stood her ground. And in doing so, she changed the altitude for everyone who comes after her. So here's a question for you. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't belong somewhere, even when you knew you did? Drop your story in the comments. We read everyone. And if this story moved you like it did us, subscribe to the channel because we're just getting started. More true, powerful, and unforgettable stories are on their way.